Hey there, I'm Stan Baker, one of your hosts for Circle Forum. And in this episode, Shelley Steele and Steve Young and I have our fourth of four discussions on an article published in October of 2022 called School Attendance Problems Are Complex and Our Solutions Need to Be as Well. Know your attendance data. That's what it comes down to. In busy school days and weeks, it's relatively easy to be distracted by the immediate concerns that go with being in a school. But we ignore attendance data at our peril or pay attention when someone's been away for 15 consecutive days, which is often too late to change the trajectory of absenteeism. With restorative practice, it's important to remember that each person in school plays a role in student attendance. Practically, that means things like have the person with the best connections to the family do the contacting, be prepared to listen, and engage families in the conversation without blame or shame. At the end of this episode, you'll want to check out our website, www.restorative.ca. Follow us on YouTube at Circle Forum. And now let's get to the conversation already in progress with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. The fourth part of this article talks about data and that we need attendance data. This seems to be like one of those motherhood and apple pie kinds of things. And yet it seems as if people don't know what's happening with attendance in schools.
I think this is really where you need to start, right? I mean, you really, if you want to get into the other things are have roles to play, but if you really need to understand the needs of attendance in your school, you need to start with your data. And they talk about red flagging. One school I worked with, we came up with a system where the secretaries would run a report. I'd go in once a week and say, give me the list of students. This was secondary school who have missed 3 or more classes or whatever number you pick, right? And now you start to flag students, and some of them will be discarded really quickly because you knew they were off with a broken leg, and other ones, we don't really know what's going on for this, and you start to see patterns. But it really is a place to start to put a face to the attendance numbers,
I think you're
you
right.
know?
We collect the standard data, and this is what the article says. And it's important. And we collect certain types of attendance data, but we don't go deeper into what the data actually is about. And I've told the story earlier about the school I had where we had all these intermediates showing up late every day because they didn't like the subjects in the first part of the day. And so they weren't absent, they were just all late. So we had to look at our late data, not our absent. And that started to tell the story. So as soon as we started asking the kids, what's going on? Why are you all late? And we don't like this subject. It happened to be first subject of the day. So we revamped, the next year we revamped our timetables. But it's digging deeper in the data. We've always talked about this. If a kid is absent for a certain number of days, what is the reason for that absence? And we have all these reason codes now. And every year, I think they add more and more reason code. But now with a lot of the call-in systems and computerized systems that school boards are using, the parents just call it in and they just press a number on the keypad and that records the reason code. And so parents, there's no one at the other end of the line to dig deeper and start the conversation and find out really what's going on. Parents can just do it anonymously and the reason code is collected and no one ever talks to the person after that. All of a sudden we collect all this data that says your child's been absent X number of days for these various reasons. And then the conversation starts. As this is saying, we need a flag system. But there is certain value in having that person at the end of the line to have a conversation with people when they're reporting their child absence or when the school calls them to say your child's absent and you didn't call it in, because then it can develop that rapport. So you can start to have the deeper conversations about reasons. I remember having conversations with parents, you'd call them and then you get into a deep conversation about they're really resistant to come to school and I'm not sure what's going on. And can you talk to them? And now you've opened up a door to have conversations with kids that dig deeper in some of the reasons for their absence. And you may be finding out it is bullying, or maybe they're not prepared for a subject, or maybe there's a teacher that they don't like, or other kids are making fun of them, or some other reason. But we don't get those reasons until we have the conversations. And so the electronic things, they're great. but we really need to jump on those sooner when we see some patterns forming and have the conversations with parents.
And one of the things that's been raised to me by staff at schools is that as a system, as a school and an educational system, we've separated attendance from the classroom itself. And so we've, in a lot of ways, we've done a handoff. I notice it, I just hand it off to you, you hand it off to the next person. And the sequence can go something like this. I notice that somebody's missing, or I'm the person tracking it in the office. I let a vice principal or principal know. They pass it along to a child and youth worker or to an attendance counselor, and then it's off my plate. And the thing that needs to be shifted, I think, and certainly that's what we're trying to work on with attending to students' absenteeism, the 2x10, is that each person plays a role in school in student attendance. And then part of what we need to think about is, what is my role? What's the piece that I have to play? Am I part of the early warning system? Am I part of the calling the parents? Am I part of the restorative attendance conference, where we, rather than expelling someone or sending to the truancy officer, that we actually set up a meeting that's based on restorative circle and have a conversation about what's going on, bring the parents in and bring the student in, and what's been happening with Johnny's attendance from your perspective, and have that conversation. So everybody has a role in school in student attendance. But that's a huge shift. That's a huge shift.
And who makes sense to make that call or that connection? Is it the classroom teacher? Maybe it's not. If it is, and this teacher already has an ongoing dialogue with the family, to then get a call from the child and youth counselor would send the parent a few steps back. Whereas in that, as a school, who makes sense to make that call? Maybe the VP or the P has had lots of conversations with the parents and has a good connection. Maybe it makes sense for them to make that call. So just have that conversation as a school team. But yeah, it's again the piece. And in my work, it was often when we were at the chronic issues. So now, if somebody had called last semester, we might be in a different place, because we often tend to wait. Either they're being taken off the register. Holy cow, we waited a long time. But it doesn't take that long, particularly for secondary students, to lose their semester. And they haven't come out of their bedroom for 3 weeks, other than the basics. But nobody's asked. And parents don't always think to call the school and say, my kid's not coming out of his bedroom, I don't know what to do. They'll just keep calling in to say they're ill. And so that's where the chronic comes. And it's a whole lot harder to come back from the chronic than it is to catch it earlier, if not impossible sometimes for some students.
And one of the things you're raising there, Shelley, is that we often don't have our internal houses in order, or our internal schools in order, in terms of just communication between the team. Who has actually contacted this family, and what kind of a little system, what kind of a process do we have in place internally in order to deal with the data that we're receiving? So if it's great to have an early warning system, but if nobody is checking in with that, or nobody is following up on it, what's the point? If I'm a classroom teacher and I'm told, look, if after 3 absences, I need to do X or Y, and I notice that nothing is happening, well, screw that. I'm not going to do that anymore, because nobody does anything with it anyway. And so it just completely disintegrates. So it's finding out about the data for sure, but then doing something with it internally so that you actually figure out, okay, so who is going to, like you said, make the call? Who is the person that's best situated? Who has, and I loved what you said, who has the best connection with the family already, that can do that type of follow-up.
I would just like to add, if we're looking at data, is to look at your suspension data as well, because it does we're talking, sometimes when we talk attendance, we only talk about attendance for parent excused, but attendance for students that are repeatedly suspended, we know also affects their academics.
And it
may seem like a no-brainer, but we don't often account for those students when we're talking about attendance. It's always for the excused attendance students.
And I'll put a link to some research that was done in the Toronto area around early indicators that actually, and this is another piece of this, you can actually predict based on past behaviors whether or not somebody's actually going to even graduate from high school. So you can tell by grade 4 if they've had a year of being chronically absent, that is missing 10% of any of the first 4 years, if they've been suspended even once, and if they're part of a special needs class, the likelihood of them graduating from high school is significantly diminished with each compounding indicator. So even just to take a look at the data, to step back and take a look at the data will be helpful to be able to intentionally focus on students that are most at risk of not completing school because attendance is an issue for them.
Because we often don't put the face to students that are repeatedly suspended. It's just a number. It's not till you start to lay your data out in a different way that we can see that has been suspended at least 2 days every week. And so now you see it in a pattern rather than just 6 days out of the month. You start to see how that's accumulating, and we're not seeing any change in his behavior, and we're still doing the same thing over and over again. But now we also have an attendance issue in there as well.
It is kind of ironic, isn't it, that our fourth conversation about the complexity involved in student attendance says start with the data. If we can start to see early indicators of absenteeism in our student attendance data, we can arrange conversations and interventions before it starts to escalate. Want to find out more about how you can be intentional with your school attendance data? Drop me an email to stan@restorative.ca. Check out our website for free resources at www.restorative.ca.